All right, let's go. We are designing this week. We are ideating. Welcome teams, welcome to week 4, which is about ideation. It's about designing the actual idea that you're gonna put out in the world. And this is what you've been waiting for. It's what you've been thinking about this whole time. It's what you've been building a foundation to create a really incredible product or service or idea that's going to transform the world. And you spent a lot of time thinking about the world that you want to transform. You spent a lot of time imagining the transformations that could be. And now is the moment when you kind of bring it all together. So Kate and I are really excited to be here with you and walk through some of the bits and pieces that we think really advance good ideation process and design process. So once again, this is going to be recorded. It's going to be Creative Commons, and it will be an openly accessible body of knowledge. So let's review the work so far. Kate walked with you through a lot of this last week, but so far you've done a lot. Kate, do you want to walk through this?
As Matthew said, you've done a lot so far. We started out really looking at stakeholders and feedback and really just sort of starting to understand what is the opportunity and the spaces for value creation that your work can add to. Last week, we spent a lot of time just defining what is your vision, or what was kind of the output of your speculative world. How would the world look like differently now that you are in the process of implementing and sort of developing your idea and your venture, and really sort of grounded that then within the mission, which is really what is the good that you're providing and for who. And foundational to that is looking at sort of who you are as a team and what are the values that guide you. What are the values that influence your culture? What are the values that influence how you make sort of ethical decisions? What are the values that influence like what you do and what you don't do? And those were really taking all of those as foundational sort of elements going into this ideation week.
These are the ingredients of a design process. These are, like Kate said, a foundation that you're building on. And so we just want to revisit this. I know it's something you've seen before, and it's something you've been thinking about this whole time. But it's important here, before we dive into a design process, to really have a discussion. What are we thinking about environmental, economic, and social impact? How are these things going to be a part of what you do? And so when you think about the idea itself, you're always going to be using these lenses, these 3 different lenses. So constantly evaluating. So we actually want to make that a real discussion. So we ask that you pause the video right now, and for however long it takes, even if it's 10 minutes, to really think through and discuss how you want your work to create environmental, economic, and social impact. Pause. We're back, and we're going to talk about your goals for the day. So today, you really have 2 key goals that you want to achieve. And these are things that you'll start working on. You may not finish, and that's okay. They're both big and complex tasks. And so your deliverable is not going to be for a few days, but today we're going to talk through these 2 things: the spec sheet and the minimum viable product, or MVP. So the spec sheet is a set of documents that outlines the idea. It's like a blueprint. It shows how your idea is going to fill the problem space that you mapped out, and how your idea is going to create value for the stakeholders you've engaged with. And so you're going to work on 5 documents. This is a design document that's just, what is your thing? What's it look like? A process or use map, like how does this thing work? inputs and resource list. This is sort of what it needs in order to work. The manufacturing or production plan, and that's how you're going to build it, and how maybe each version of it is going to be built. And then finally, a life cycle flow. So at the end of its life, when it's not useful anymore, if it's a product, is it going to go in a garbage can and end up in a landfill? Is it going to be recycled and reused? Or if it's a service, once someone stops using your service, sort of what happens? And you can think about that as a kind of life cycle flow. So we're going to do this grand vision. We're going to map out the whole idea, but we're also going to take a step back, or many steps back, and think about the minimum viable product. And this is the kind of like most simple, the most basic version of your idea. And it's something you can actually build during this workshop and put out in the world and test and look at how it performs and use it as a tool to learn something about your stakeholders, learn something about the idea, learn something about how you want to manufacture and build it. So today we're going to design an MVP. Actually, we're going to design several different versions of an MVP based on your learning goals and create a plan to build the MVP. And then we're actually going to hopefully start building. So before we get into that, I want to give you an example. So we're talking about design, we're talking about ideation. And this, for me, is one of the most inspiring design companies, because what they're doing is really counterintuitive. They're an excellent social innovation. This company is called Opendesk. And you can see this beautiful furniture in this shop. This is like the office that everyone wants to work in. And Opendesk is about making furniture, but it's different than IKEA or Herman Miller, or any other furniture design company. Check out their mission statement. By connecting you to local customers in your area, instead of selling mass-produced goods, our mission is to enable a more socially and environmentally conscious mode of production, fit for the 21st century. So you'll notice that this mission statement is not addressing the person who sits in the chair or buys the chair. It's actually addressing the person who makes the chair. And that's a really interesting space to be working on. So their spec sheet, their ideation is kind of different than any other furniture company I've seen. This is an example of some of the products. They've got a lot of different products. You can fit out your whole office and a lot of your home with Opendesk furniture. It's really simple, it's really beautiful. And you can tell it's kind of these pieces that fit together like a puzzle. And it's thought of differently. So at the top here, you see what a traditional manufacturing process looks like. You've got a designer, sometimes it's a really famous designer, who designs a piece of furniture. Then you mass produce it as cheap as possible. Then you have mass logistics. You're probably manufacturing somewhere way around the world. You're trying to bring all these big, bulky chairs around the world, or if you're IKEA, you're flat packing it. Then you have a warehouse for stocking this. You probably need warehouses in every country, if not every city. And these are big warehouses because furniture is big. So a lot of environmental impact in all of this. Then you need to sell it to people. So you have this retail markup, right? Like stores need to charge a lot more. And then finally, for the end user, it's a long time before I order my chair and I finally get it. An Opendesk, the way they've thought about it, actually means they can do this differently. It's a global platform for local making. So they host digital furniture designs that can be made anywhere in the world through a global network of local makers. They connect customers to a library of designs and a host of nearby craftsmen. And by doing that, they ensure that furniture is made on demand, locally, sustainably, and affordably. So it's really smart. They're connecting the person who makes the furniture, who might be right down the block here, and they're allowing me to choose some design online, and then the local guy will make it and then bring it over to me. And so what I find really exciting about Opendesk is it's a shift from business as usual to what they call business as mutual. And the economics are totally different. So as you can see here on the left, normal furniture, there's a huge markup. There's a lot of cost that goes into just kind of like the idea of the chair that you're buying. There's a lot of storage and shipping costs. There's design costs, which is actually fairly small, and then manufacturing. But with Opendesk, you've got a very small markup, which is basically a platform fee for this online platform. Instead of storage and shipping, you're paying a little bit for the technology platform. And so that's website stuff. Instead of a tiny little bit going to the designer, you actually have quite a bit going to the designer. And by the way, anyone can design Opendesk furniture and submit it to this global platform. And then there's this manufacturing cost. So instead of mass manufacturing and trying to make it cheaply, you're paying a lot to local manufacturers and allowing them to have sustainable income. So this is a global community of design. This really is great for people who are designers. They could be professional designers, or they could be someone like me who has a cool idea for a chair. There's very simple ways you can upload your design to the platform. This is a maker. So this guy can actually have a sustainable business as a local fabrication shop because he's able to make furniture and not have to kind of rely on commissions from all over the place. You can actually continually get commissions from this platform. And so what Opendesk did that I find really interesting is they created all these online platforms instead of actually focusing on creating furniture. This is the platform for the makers that they created. It's called FabHub. And as a local fabricator, as a maker, I can list my space on FabHub and then get commissions for products. So you can see fabrication labs all over the world are listed here. And you can list kind of the different things that you do. 3D printing, is it just woodwork, is it whatever else? So we find this really exciting. It's an alternative design if you want to achieve a goal like making beautiful furniture. The spec sheet would be totally different than IKEA's spec sheet. It would be totally different than Herman Miller's spec sheet. And that has impacts on how the finance works. It has impacts on what kinds of people you need to employ. It has impact on every part of the business. So we're going to think about those details. We're going to think about who you're employing. We're going to think about what the actual idea is. And we call that a spec sheet. A product spec sheet is like a blueprint. So this is a set of documents that outlines the product you'll build, what it's going to look like, what the requirements are, the functions. Basically, this is everything that you need to describe your idea. So how do you go about writing your spec sheet, your blueprint, this complete description of your idea? So how do you write your spec sheet? Today, we're going to talk about the spec sheet as a set of documents. And this is your blueprint. It's your complete idea. And it's a way of describing what you're going to do. This is something you could hand to someone, and it would be a complete description of your innovation. So there are 5 key elements of this. The first is a design document. And this is spelling out what the product is and what it looks like, kind of the thing of it. You'll write up a process map, which is how it works. And you can do this in any number of ways. You can talk about it from a user perspective. You can kind of create a diagram for the performance of the thing. And this will vary case by case. Every one of your ideas will have a different kind of process map. You have to write up your inputs and the resources that your product needs. So if it's a car, it's going to need some gas. And this could also be the raw materials that's going into it. You will write up a manufacturing plan. This is how it's actually going to be built, how it's going to be assembled, how the creation of the thing works. And this is true also of technology, how you're going to actually build the technology. And then finally, a life cycle chart. This is what happens at the end of the use. So if you're making a kind of soft drink, the can of the soft drink will end up maybe in the recycling, and it's important to make it then of recyclable materials. But if it's a technology, what happens to maintain the technology? What happens when someone stops using the technology? What happens when someone wants to delete their account? These are all important things to think about as a life cycle map. These are some examples. This is a spec sheet for a very physical kind of product, Trackster HD8T. So I think this is a really good example of a spec sheet. It has things like the engine, the suspension, the brakes, sort of what kind of components are going into the thing. But it also has dimensions, kind of like overall, what's the thing? It's got an image. What does it look like? It talks about the features. And so these are kind of like what makes this an excellent tractor. And what I really like is at the top, under highlights, it says this thing is tough, it's capable, it's clever. So you're also talking about some of the more kind of like qualitative aspects of this thing and why your product is an excellent thing. On the right-hand side, you see an example of what needs to be kind of included in a life cycle map. So this is a very specific kind of life cycle map that describes the physical product. You've got raw material, you've got manufacturing, you've got transportation, you've got utilization and reuse, and then of course, disposal and recycling. So my guess is that when the OpenDesk founders were starting to think about OpenDesk as a platform, they were looking at this life cycle map for ordinary furniture, and they thought, if we design a different kind of platform, if our service is different, maybe we can cross a lot of this impact out of the equation. So we can actually benefit the earth and benefit our different stakeholder groups if we think of this from a life cycle map perspective. So even if your idea is a service, you should be making a spec sheet, even if it's not a tractor that you're building. Kate, do you want to walk through what a service spec sheet would look like?
Absolutely. So just building off of the example that Matthew gave on the tractor before, is a lot of these elements are still critical for services, right? So the qualitative components of it, the features, and some of the details in terms of the input. So if you are doing a service or something that is much more service centered, you're going to detail out these same 5 documents, but with a service spin. So first you're going to ask, what is the service? And this is really just detailing out sort of the design of that service. Then you're going to ask, how does it work? Which is really looking at the process map. So this might be something like, if your service is collecting recyclables, to go back to that example, your first sort of step might be calling the person that you're collecting the recyclables from, going and collecting those recyclables and then dropping those recyclables off at the recyclable center or the recyclable center in some way, shape, or form. And so you're really sort of drawing out that process map from start to finish in that space. And you're asking in this service space, what does it need in order to work? For some of you, your service may be something that's only exists sort of online and in a very digital format. For other of you, this might be a physical location. For other folks, this might be much more of sort of a system where you're sort of in multiple locations and you need transportation or something else that's really sort of holding that service. And then we want you to go into the implementation plan and really just start to detail out how will the service be built and maintained. Again, this is going to vary from service to service, but it's really sort of looking at how would you start to implement this and what are sort of the resources and the steps that you need to maintain that service over time. And finally, you're going to ask what happens when someone stops using the service. This question matters for different services in different ways. For instance, if you were doing something that's around education, then you might ask, once somebody has sort of graduated from my school or my program, where do they go to next? And what is our relationship with that person? And these are the types of questions that you're really trying to ask here, is what is kind of the handover, or what is kind of the end state for people that are using your service?
Right. So we want you to start thinking about these 5 documents. Take some time to brainstorm. You don't need to write out those documents completely, but we want you to have a discussion with your team to start thinking about each one of them. And you can have a lot of different ideas about what the kind of central specifications are. You can have a lot of different ideas about how it's recycled at the end of the life cycle. And we want to just kind of bubble those up. Tonight, tomorrow, you can work on actually writing a spec sheet. We think that this tractor template, we think that this life cycle map could be good as tools to use for creating those. So don't worry about the 5 final bullet points right now, but just throw some ideas on the wall. Get a conversation going. What is your idea? 3, 2, 1, go. All right, so you've got tons of different ideas. You've got lots of different things running. You had a good conversation about the different aspects of a spec sheet. Maybe you started writing down some sticky notes and bullet points. That's all really good. I hope that you had a grand idea, that your vision is huge, that you worked through some of these questions, these elements of the blueprint. But for now, we actually need to take a step back. We need to think about the minimum viable product, because really this design process is still happening. We're still, we're not too far in. We're still in the middle of the workshop. We're not ready to launch the full idea out into the world. We still need to learn something about the space we're working in. And we need to learn about that specific idea that you've started to map out. We need to learn, is it the right idea? Is it the thing that's going to create the most value? Is it interacting with your stakeholders correctly? And a really great tool in order to learn those things is called a minimum viable product. So this is essentially the smallest version of your product. It's sort of like a prototype. It's different than a prototype because it's not the actual idea itself. It's like a sketch of the idea that allows you to ask certain questions and learn certain things and advance the design. So it's got just enough features to be buildable and usable. So you need to actually make one this week, and you need to put it out in the world. You need to have your stakeholders test it and actually get feedback from them if they like it, if it provided value, and use that insight in order to inform the future product development. So designing your MVP. The most important thing to know is that there's not just one MVP out there that's like the perfect one that encompasses your idea. It's actually, you could design many different MVPs, and we will do that. There's a lot of different ways that you can boil down your full idea into a kind of minimum testable thing. And the important thing is that you should design any one of those MVPs to answer important questions. So as you're designing your MVP, you need to think about if you can build it quickly. Are you actually able to do it? Maybe you're going to make it out of paper. Maybe you're going to make it just kind of like do it yourself instead of having a technology that does the thing. And the goal is then to test it. So you have to think about how you're going to test it. And next week, we'll really get into the experimenting and the testing of it. And you have to think about what is going to help you learn. So as you're designing your MVP, the starting point is really to understand what you want to learn about your idea. And then walk backward from whatever that learning goal is into some sort of design object that's going to help you answer questions. So another example. Let's say we want to imagine an MVP for an online grocery delivery app. You're probably familiar with apps like Amazon Fresh or Instacart. These are huge technologies. They've got a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot going on that makes Amazon Fresh or Instacart do what it does. There's people who go through the grocery store and they pick products. There's people who drive products from the grocery store to people's homes. There's, of course, the technology platform that allows me, sitting here in my desk, to go and order all the groceries I want. There's paper bags that have to be, or I guess they use reusable bags. There's the bags, there's lots and lots and lots of moving pieces. And so in order to design that really effectively, how are we going to create an MVP? So here's an example, some thoughts. So you might start by calling people and just asking them, hey, what is on your grocery list this week? What products are you going to buy? You could ask them, if they want to compare prices of a particular item. You could call people and say, okay, you want lettuce. Do you want the most expensive organic lettuce, or do you want the cheapest lettuce? And you could literally, at the end of this week, call people and ask them if they want you to shop for them, and get a list of things that they want you to buy. It's very easy. You don't need much. You need your phone and a piece of paper. So then you could go to the grocery store and actually go and find those things. While you're there, you might want to interview other people in the grocery store about why they came to the grocery store instead of using an online service. You might think about, if you're pushing a big cart, are you getting in the way of people? How much can you fit in the cart? You can really start to learn a lot about that grocery picker experience. And then you could just go and drop it off. All of this is something you could do at the end of next week. But by dropping it off, you'll learn, is there a good spot in a lot of homes to drop things off? Do I need to adjust my design in order to call people when I'm dropping it off? You're really going to learn a lot by walking through this actual process. But what's interesting about this MVP is all I need is my phone, a piece of paper, and a pen, and then I can go to the grocery store and pick products and drop them off at someone's house. And so this is a really great way of improving the design of the idea. So there are a lot of different versions of an MVP. Kate, do you want to brainstorm off the top of your head? I'm putting you on the spot. Off the top of your head, Kate, what's a different version, and what are some questions that you might want to answer if you're designing Instacart?
One question that I would want to learn about is how people learn about Instacart. A second question that I might want to try out is how people pay for Instacart and how people are paid by Instacart. For the first one, I might just test out putting signs up around my neighborhood. I might also test out putting up Facebook advertisements targeted with a very specific geography, which is something that you can do literally in 24 hours and just test out and see what people's responses are. Those are two ideas that I have.
Yeah, you could create a Google form where people can check off boxes. Do I want apples and oranges and lettuce, and then buy things for them and drop it off.
Totally.
So Another brainstorming session. We want 5 different MVPs of your full idea. These are going to answer different questions. They might answer a question about the design of the product itself. They might answer a question about how it's manufactured. And they might answer a question about what this looks like from the perspective of someone who's not a user. So without further ado, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. All right, so you've designed some MVPs. These are things that you can build fast. They're things you can test in the world. They're things that will help you learn. So hopefully you've got 5, maybe just 3 good ideas for MVPs right now. And as a sneak preview, what we're going to be doing next week is actually going out and testing them in the world. We're going to be experimenting. And so now you've got a few different ideas of your MVP. And so it's important to think about which one you actually want to test and build in the next few days. And in order to do that, you should start thinking about how you actually want to test and evaluate this thing. What questions you want to answer, and then whether or not you can really build it and test it. So if the goal of the MVP is to evaluate and improve the idea, you're going to want to think about how it's going to affect the stakeholders, whether or not it creates value or harm, how your stakeholders are feeling about the thing, if it requires additional features or maybe fewer features. And then if it's feasible to produce this thing, is it just going to be way too expensive? Is it feasible to deploy this thing? How are you going to get it out into the world? OpenDesk, they found a really great way to deploy this. Instead of shipping things, you have them built locally. And so you're going to need to test some of those questions. So you've got some MVPs, and you should really think about these different types of impact and use those to choose which one of the MVPs that you want to test and build. Next week, you're gonna really map out the evaluation, but right now, sneak preview, start thinking about how you're gonna evaluate it. If you can answer these questions, how it affected stakeholders, what are the economic, social, and environmental impacts, if it's possible to produce and deploy this thing, and then how you're gonna revise your idea or rewrite your spec sheet. So at the end of today, before you leave, we want you to actually choose which of the MVPs you're going to start building and get to work building it. So that's all we have for you this week. You'll be distributed some worksheets, and we're looking forward to seeing the 5 spec sheet documents, and we're looking forward to hearing about your MVP before next week we start testing and evaluating it. Kate, any last thoughts?
No last thoughts. Just, I think this is a really incredible time to take some of what you've learned from your stakeholders and really ground that into the MVP, and just encourage you to be creative and throw ideas up for grabs and really think about what explicitly is important to test. I think oftentimes this can be sort of the winding, expanding space. And one of the things that I always appreciate in how Matthew speaks about MVPs is he's really breaking down the specific components of your idea into testable areas and testable variables that you can really test. And that's really what we want you to do this week as you're designing your MVPs and really thinking about what's critical to understand, what's critical to test, and just how do you test it. There's a million different ways that we can make any idea happen. And this is an opportunity to really think creatively. And that might be using, as Matthew said, your phone, a piece of paper, and a car to get somewhere. Or it might mean using Google Forms for something, or it might mean walking with somebody in a park. Like, there's a whole different ways that we can sort of test these different things. So I encourage you to use the resources that you have, and just really think about, like, what are the testable units that are important to your work.
Good luck.
Thank you and see you next week.